Mike, check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. And I think that there's a topic that we do need to discuss when it comes to collecting. And it's the difference between collecting versus curating. Now, I think a lot of times people confuse the two, or sometimes they might think the two are synonymous, but they're really not. I'll give you an example. There are many games that are out there and are available for the Neo Geo Pocket. There are a ton of games that you can go out there and buy and build a strong Neo Geo Pocket collection if you're thinking about how many games there are out there. But there are only a certain number of games that are really going to tickle your fancy depending on the types of games that you like to play and the types of games that you like to enjoy. Now, for me, despite there being a lot of games out there for the Neo Geo Pocket, there were only really 3 that I wanted to have in my very small curated collection. And that was Bust-A-Move Pocket, primarily because when I used to play Marvel vs. Capcom, the first one, the arcade store that I used to go to, they did have a Neo Geo, arcade tower there. And in there were, I think it was like one of those 4-in-1. And one of the games they had in there was Bust-A-Move. And Bust-A-Move was one of those really great wind down games that I would play. Like, let's say I had gone on a roll. Because, you know, back in the day when you would play games like Marvel vs. Capcom or Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in the arcade, you would get challengers. People would come up and they would try to challenge you. And sometimes if you were having a hot day, like if you were on fire, you might go 20 wins in a row, 21 wins in a row, and you might have someone spend all of their lunch money in an afternoon trying to beat you in the game. And when you play that many competitive matches, it really does get your adrenaline going. Ask anyone who's played any type of competitive fighting game. They will tell you when you get in the zone, you're in the zone and your adrenaline's pumping. I don't know if you've ever watched like Smash Bros tournaments, but when those guys get in the zone, they're in the zone. But I digress. One of the games that I used to play back in the day to kind of calm myself down and like wind myself down before leaving the arcade store was Bust-A-Move, because it was so opposite of the fast moving and frenetic energy of the fighting games, and it was just more slow paced and it was more strategy based and you had to think about what you were doing. That Bust-A-Move was just a game that I strongly remember. So getting the pocket version for me was super important. Another game that was really important for me, obviously, was Metal Slug First Mission, because I've always been a huge fan of the run and gun shooter, so Metal Slug was a must. And then getting this complete and box copy of Metal Slug Second Mission was super important to me, which really kind of rounds out my overall Neo Geo Pocket collection. I don't need to get another Neo Geo game or another Neo Geo Pocket game to feel like my collection is complete. I've effectively curated the collection that's tailored to my gameplay preference and my gameplay style, and the collection includes all of the games that mean the most to me. Now, when I look at something like my PlayStation 4 collection, while yes, most of the games in this collection are really tailored to the games that I like to have, there are a few games in here that probably aren't games that I would particularly play like all the time. And so my PS4 collection to me feels more like a collection than necessarily a curation. Now, there are games in my collection that I would like to sell so that my PS4 collection is a little bit more tailored to the games that I typically like to play and the gameplay style that I typically like to enjoy. Now, on the flip side, my PlayStation 2 collection, which is probably half the size of my PS4 collection, this is another example of more of a curated collection, a collection of games that really just are tailored more towards my gameplay style and things that I like to indulge in. And even still in my PS2 collection, there are games that I could probably trade away. Like, I'm not super into the horror games. I do have this copy of Silent Hill 2, which I've been tempted to dive into every once in a while. But games like, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom, which I've talked about, Xenosaga, Blood Will Tell, Forever Kingdom, Urban Reign, Alien Hominid. These are more of the action-based adventure games that I personally find myself into. Another example of a curated collection that I have would be my Sega CD collection, which has a lot of the gameplay styles that I'm into, like Android Assault, and Robo Alesti, The Terminator, and Lords of Thunder. There are a couple RPG games in here that I've toyed with the idea of selling, including Lunar 2 and but I've kept them in the collection because they're games that I may want to dabble into. But I think the best example of a curated collection would probably be my Sega Saturn collection, which is strictly made up of action platforming and action-based games, with the exception of House of the Dead, which is more of like a first-person shooter type game that you would need a light gun for. And so I say all that to say that I think it's really important when we start to build out our collections to really understand what it is that we're trying to do. If you're going out and you're trying to just build a collection of games, then it won't really matter what games you're buying. Usually when you're in collection mode, you're usually thinking more in terms of quantity and price. So you're probably thinking, how many games can I get for the $10 that I have in my pocket? And when you think that way, you'll typically run out and buy a bunch of $1 games that probably are not of the best quality, that probably aren't the most fun, that probably don't have the best graphics, maybe they don't have the best music or voiceovers, and they're just lacking when they're compared to other games within their same genre that have just much better quality production. And so I think there are two types of collectors out there when it comes to video games. I think you have your curators, those who know the types of games that they're going for, and they're building a very specific type of collection. And then you just have your raw collectors who are just looking at everything from a quantity over quality standpoint, and they're just buying a bunch of games just for the sake of filling up shelves. And I think with where the hobby is going, and with a lot of the things that we have at our disposal when you consider like emulation and things like that, if you're gonna invest or spend the money to get original hardware, whether it be the console or the actual cartridge or disc, I think you might just want to be a little bit more conscientious about what it is you're investing your funds into. And the only reason why I say that is because quantity feels good just for the moment. When you buy and collect based on quantity, it does give you that strong dopamine hit that makes you feel good about the size or the amount of games that you have in your collection. But what I've tend to notice is that the feelings about your quantity change a lot faster than the things that you find that are quality. We tend to hold on to things that we know mean more to us or just have a lot more quality to them than the things that we just bought for the sake of buying, or because they were, they were there, they were available, and they were cheap. And I think some of my worst purchases when building a video game collection or curation were those purchases that I made because it was cheap. Oh, well, it's only $5, so let me go ahead and get it. Or it was only $1, so let me go ahead and buy it. Sometimes that's the fastest way for you to burn through good dollars that could be spent on much more quality items. And I always say it like this: I'd much rather pass on $61 games and buy one $60 game that's of the best quality, that's in the highest tier of its genre, and is probably a legendary game that's going to give me a ton of replay value. But I'm interested to know what you think. Do you think there's a difference between collecting and curating? I'm very interested to know, because we're definitely at a very interesting point when it comes to the hobby of retro game collecting and video game collecting. And I think it's something that anyone who's out buying games today or in the hobby today might want to consider. I'm the Y2K Collector, just coming at you with some provoking thought on a Saturday. Hope you're enjoying this beautiful weather. Take it easy.